The Watcher in the Woods. It was late October, the kind of crisp, cool weather that makes you want to bundle up and sit by a fire. My friend Eric and I decided to take one last camping trip before the winter set in. We picked a spot deep in the woods, far from any towns or people. It was a place Eric had been to once before, years ago, and he swore it was the perfect spot. Quiet, secluded, and surrounded by towering pines. We arrived in the late afternoon, just as the sun was starting to dip below the treetops. The drive had been long, and the dirt road leading to the campsite was barely wide enough for my truck. By the time we parked and unloaded our gear, the shadows in the forest had grown long, and the air had a biting chill. The campsite was beautiful, though. A small clearing surrounded by dense trees, with a fire pit someone had built long ago. We set up our tent, gathered some firewood, and got a fire going just as the last light of day faded. The crackling flames cast flickering shadows on the trees, and for a while, everything felt peaceful. We cooked some hot dogs over the fire, cracked open a couple of beers, and talked about everything and nothing. The kind of easy conversation you have when you're out in the middle of nowhere with no distractions. But as the night wore on, the forest around us seemed to grow quieter. The usual sounds of crickets and rustling leaves faded, leaving only the occasional pop of the fire. At first, we didn't think much of it. Maybe it was just the cold, or maybe we were so used to the noise of the city that the silence felt unnatural. But then we heard it. A faint sound like a branch snapping somewhere in the distance. Eric froze mid-sentence, his eyes darting toward the trees. "Did you hear that?" he asked. I nodded, straight at my ears. For a moment there was nothing. Then another snap, closer this time. It wasn't the sound of an animal moving through the underbrush. It was deliberate, like someone stepping on a branch. "Probably just a deer," I said, trying to sound casual. But my voice wavered and Eric noticed. "Yeah, maybe," he said, though he didn't sound convinced. We both sat there, staring into the darkness beyond the firelight. The shadows between the trees seemed to shift and move, but it was probably just our imaginations. At least, that's what I told myself. Another snap. This time it was much closer. Too close. Eric grabbed the flashlight from his bag and shone it toward the sound. A beam of light cut through the darkness, illuminating the trees, but there was nothing there. Just empty woods. "Hello?" Eric called out. His voice echoed through the trees, but there was no response. We sat in silence for a while, listening, but the sound didn't come again. Eventually, we convinced ourselves it was nothing and tried to relax. Eric even made a joke about how we were acting like characters in a horror movie, jumping at every little noise. I laughed, but it felt forced. We decided to call it a night not long after that. The fire was dying down and the cold was starting to seep into our bones. We crawled into the tent, zipped it up tight, and settled into our sleeping bags. Eric fell asleep almost immediately, but I couldn't. I kept thinking about the sounds we'd heard, about how deliberate they had seemed. I must have dozed off at some point because the next thing I remember is waking up to a strange noise. It was faint at first, like a low hum, but it grew louder, more distinct. It sounded like whispering. Dozens of voices all speaking at once, too quiet to make out the words. I sat up, my heart pounding. The whispering seemed to be coming from all around us, circling the tent. I shook Eric awake and he groggily asked what was wrong. Before I could answer, we both heard it. A long, slow drag, like something heavy being pulled across the ground, just outside the tent. Eric grabbed the flashlight and unzipped the tent just enough to shine the light outside. The beam swept across the clearing, but again, there was nothing there. The whispering stopped, and the dragging sound was gone. The forest was silent once more. "Maybe it's the wind," Eric said, though he didn't sound convinced. We sat there for a long time, listening, but the sounds didn't come back. Eventually, we decided to try and get some sleep, though neither of us felt particularly tired anymore. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling of the tent, every little sound making my heart race. Sometime in the early hours of the morning, I heard it again. The dragging sound, closer this time. I held my breath, listening as it moved around the tent, slow and deliberate. Eric was awake too. I could hear his breathing, shallow and fast. Then the tent started to move. Something was brushing against it, running along the fabric. It stopped at the front of the tent where the zipper was. I could see the faint outline of a hand pressing against the fabric, slowly tracing the zipper. Eric grabbed the hatchet we'd brought for chopping firewood and whispered, "On 3, we run." I nodded, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. He counted softly, 1, 2, 3. He yanked the zipper open and we bolted out of the tent, flashlight and hatchet in hand. The fire had long since gone out, and the clearing was pitch black. We shone the flashlight around, but there was no one there. No footprints, no sign that anyone had been there at all. We didn't wait to find out what it was. We grabbed our bags, left the tent behind, and ran back to the truck as fast as we could. The whole way, I felt like we were being watched, like something was following us just out of sight. When we finally reached the truck and slammed the door shut, I felt a wave of relief. But as I started the engine and turned on the headlights, I saw something in the rearview mirror. Just for a second, standing at the edge of the trees. A figure, tall and thin, with glowing eyes that reflected the light. I didn't say anything. I just hit the gas and drove as fast as I could down that dirt road, not stopping until we were miles away. We sat in that roadside diner, trying to warm up and collect ourselves. But even there, surrounded by people, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every time the door opened, I flinched, expecting to see something or someone. But it was always just another customer or the waitress with a tray of food. Eric finally broke the silence. His voice was quiet, almost a whisper. "Do you think it's still out there?" I didn't know what to say. Honestly, I wasn't sure. But I didn't want to scare him any more than he already was. So I just said, "No, we're far away now. It couldn't have followed us." But even I didn't believe my own words. When we left the diner and walked back to the truck, the cold night air wrapped around us like a warning. The parking lot was empty and the silence was deafening. We climbed into the truck quickly and I started the engine. The headlights lit up the empty road ahead, but I still couldn't bring myself to look in the rearview mirror. We drove in silence, but the tension in the air was suffocating. At one point, I noticed Eric staring out the window, his face pale and his hands trembling slightly. "What is it?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. I think I saw it," he whispered. "Where?" "In the woods, between the trees. It was moving, following us." I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I wanted to tell him he was imagining things, that it was just a shadow or a trick of the light. But deep down, I knew he wasn't wrong. I pressed harder on the gas, the truck speeding down the winding road. I didn't care about the sharp turns or the narrow lanes. I just wanted to get as far away as possible. When we finally reached the edge of town, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. The streets were lit, houses lined the road, and there were other cars and people around. But even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there. Or worse, that something had followed us. We didn't talk much after that. Eric stayed at my place that night, neither of us wanting to be alone. But even in the safety of my apartment, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind outside the window made my heart race. It's been years since that night, but I still think about it. Sometimes, when I'm alone in the dark, I hear those same sounds, the whispers, the dragging, the faint crunch of footsteps. And every time I wonder, what if it's still out there? What if it's still watching?